morning. And what day is this? Oh, yes, it is Sunday. Is there a special something about this day in the church? Easter. And what's Easter all about? Yeah. Have you ever heard a story that somebody told you and it almost seemed too good to be true? Like maybe somebody said you were going to get a Christmas gift and you didn't really believe it could happen and you got it? Did that ever happen? None of you ever had something that you didn't believe really could happen and it did and you had to believe it? Well, I bet you if I know you guys well enough, so I know some things have happened in your life that are really pretty special that you wondered if they would ever happen, and they did. And that's what Easter's all about. And you guys already know what the church teaches about Easter, isn't it? That a man was crucified and God raised him up. And that was what happened. And a lot of people said it didn't happen, even though Jesus appeared to 500 people after he rose from the dead. Some people just say, well, they're making this story up. And they're still telling you that in these days, some people just don't believe it. It's really too good to be true, but it is true. And that's what we proclaim on Easter Sunday. Sorry, I did all the talking practically today, but it's Easter. Go, give him a hand. The actual gospel for today, the one that is specified for this Sunday, is John, the 20th chapter, St. John, the 20th chapter, beginning at the first verse. It's not the printed one. It's the one that's listed there, but that's the one I'm going to read to. So the gospel is found in the 20th chapter of St. John, beginning at the first verse. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one who Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but did not realize that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, Why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for? Thinking it was the gardener, she said, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to my Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. Some time ago, when religion was much more respected and accepted on the college's campus, it was common to have something called Religious Emphasis Week, Spiritual Emphasis Week. And usually they would invite some prominent clergyman to come and hold services or hold lectures on a number of days, 5 days, and they would give the lectures and they would ask for questions. One of the people that was in demand a lot was a man by the name of Dr. Carlisle Manley. He was a great preacher, a member of the Southern Baptist Convention, very popular on college campuses. On one particular incident, he had had the 5 days of preaching or lecturing, whatever you call it, and he asked for questions. There was a young co-ed there, probably about 18 years of age, that said, Dr. Manley, could you explain to me resurrection in simple terms, so simple that even I could understand them? Dr. Manley looked at her and he said, no. And she said, what? You can't tell me this? Why not? And I quote Dr. Manley. He looked at her, he said, I think because you have not experienced the depth of despair, doubt, darkness, and death, one cannot understand the resurrection apart from the shattering experiences of life. Someday, when you have experienced the devastations of life, you will understand the meaning of the resurrection. When I first heard this, I said, this is some arrogant theologian trying to impress everybody. What do you mean you don't understand the resurrection? More and more I thought about it, more and more I think that Dr. Marnie was right. If I want to go and explain the resurrection, I really can't do it very simply. Do I understand it? No. Not after 55 years in the ministry, I don't understand it. Are a lot of people challenging me on whether it's true or not? Yes. Do I have a logical, constructive, organized response to that? Not really. He was right. There's no simple explanation of the resurrection. Can you explain it? And if so, you don't understand it. If you don't understand it, it doesn't mean that you can't experience it. The resurrection is not a theological statement. It is something that we experience. And apart from pain, suffering, and death, it is difficult to explain the resurrection to anyone. Those college students that are reveling on the beach in Miami are not concerned about hearing about the resurrection. They don't know if it's true. They don't even want to hear about it because they are young and they are invincible. and life will go on forever, and they won't experience any tragedy. But there is no Easter Sunday without a Good Friday. The gospel lesson talks about the day of resurrection. Mary Magdalene, probably one of the closest people ever to Jesus of Nazareth. And she goes to the tomb on Easter Sunday morning. She does not go singing, "Christ the Lord is risen again." No, she went to prepare a body for burial. She comes and she finds the tomb empty. Hooray for us, but not for Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is grieving. And now the fact is that not only has her Lord died, been crucified, but now somebody has stolen his body. And she runs and tells the other disciples. They come and they see an empty tomb, Peter and John, and they don't have a clue what's going on. They said they believed, but they didn't understand that this was something that had to happen. We had to experience the pain and the crucifixion before we celebrated the resurrection. Mary leaves the tomb crying, and she's outside crying her eyes out. And she sees this man who is Jesus, and she thinks he's the gardener. Well, naturally didn't recognize him. She was looking for a corpse. But then she says, "Mary," and the voice is familiar. And she grabs on to Jesus. "Is it really you?" He grabs on so tight, won't let go. "Mary, let go of me. I've got things to do." And Mary moves from the darkness and despair to light and hope. But what is important in all of this is to note that when she first experienced the risen Christ, she had come to the place of disappointment, discouragement, and death. And then, and only then, was she able to go out and preach the word, "Christ is risen. I have seen the risen Lord." The good news is that you don't have to understand the resurrection. You don't have to be able to comprehend it. You don't have to defend it. But you do need to experience. And sometimes it comes best clarified through pain and suffering. My first real experience with the resurrection, where I really experienced it, and it was not just an idea that I learned in confirmation class, was the last week that my father lived. And he was in the hospital at La Crosse, Wisconsin. And on Thursday night, my mother asked us to come in one by one and see my father, because the doctors had said there is no hope. He hasn't got a lot of time left. And I was in the room with my father alone. My father was not somebody that was given to seeing a lot of mystical things in religion. Everything was pretty concrete. But while I was standing there with him, he looked up into the corner and he said, "Do you see what I see?" I said, "I don't see anything, Dad." He said, "Yeah, it's Jesus." And I said, "Really? Do you see him?" "No." And then he said, "Is it time?" I said, "What did he say?" He said, "It'll be a couple of days." On Saturday morning, my father passed away. But after he had had this little interaction with me, he said, "Oh yes, he told me to tell you one thing. This is for you. He said, what will it profit you if you gain the world and lose your soul? It's in his book. But that's for you. And every single day of my life, I remember those words. And I remember so much experiencing the truth of the resurrection as we attended his funeral the day before my 14th birthday. A lot of you have seen some terrible tornadoes that have been happening in the southern part of this country, some in the Midwest. Some terrible stories of things blowing to pieces by a little piece of wind. But I would like to take you to 1994, Piedmont, Alabama. In Piedmont, Alabama, there was a church called Goshen United Methodist Church. The minister there was Kelly Clem. She served there with her husband and her 2 children. One was Sarah, with 2, Hannah was 4. And just before they wound up with Palm Sunday, she drove home with the 2 kids, and Hannah asked her this question straight out of nowhere. She said, Mom, when we die, will we all die at the same time, you and Dad and my sister and I, all at the same time? And she said, well, no, we probably won't die at all the time, but we'll all be together again. And it might have satisfied Hannah because she didn't say anything. Then she seemed to be happy again. Palm Sunday was a day of celebration, like last Palm Sunday was here. And Kelly was preaching. Sarah was in the nursery. Hannah was with her junior choir in the front row with her blue and white choir uniform. And all of a sudden, the thunder was heard, the lightning, and the wind came up. And all of a sudden, the stained glass window at the front of the church just blew right out into hundreds of pieces all over the congregation. And Kelly yelled out, tornado, run for cover. She got out of the pulpit, and then the roof flew off, and then the building started to collapse. She's going to run toward the nursery, but a brick hit her on the head, knocked her to the ground. And she got up, and she looked toward the nursery, and somebody there said, everything's all right. Sarah's okay. Sarah's okay. Now we just have to find Hannah. And he looked. Then she saw part of a robe sticking out from the front row. And she went and dug out the rock or the bricks. But it was too late. Hannah, along with 19 other people, had died from the collapse of the church. 86 wounded. The next 6 days were filled with funerals. And then at the end of the week, the call started to come in to Kelly. Are we going to have Easter services this year? The church is devastated. One after the other. And Kelly said, what I heard them all saying was, we definitely need Easter Sunday this year. And she said, on Easter Sunday, we put up a number of makeshift chairs all around the rubble. And somebody had created a cross in the middle of the rubble of the church. And she said, I can't imagine being any other place than this place on Easter Sunday, because never have we been able to understand the miracle of the message of Easter Sunday like we have this week. And as we reflect back on the last year in this country or this world, there is nothing more pressing than hearing the message of Easter Sunday, because it seems almost like the world collapsed over the last year. And people telling you couldn't go to church, can't do anything. And I saw so many people struggling. And toward the end of this last year and the beginning of this year, we saw 4 funerals in a little over, we saw 5 funerals in a little over 2 months. And I struggle with those deaths because they're all so precious. And this year, more than any other year that I have been alive and been a part of a church, never have I felt the need for Easter Sunday and the message of resurrection. There were so many that said they would like to be in church but couldn't. We had one who said, I don't care if I get COVID, I'd rather get COVID and die than not be able to go to church. That was your mother. And there's one quote that she made just about 10 days before she died. We were talking about death and we were talking about resurrection. She said, Christmas is coming up, but then Easter's soon after that. And I said, you think you'll be still alive, Dorothy? You think you'll be alive on Easter Sunday? And she said, oh, I'll be alive all right, but might not be at New Sweden. I might be home with Bill. No offense, Jens, but I'd rather be with him. One by one, I could go through experience with each person who died, and they experienced the resurrection, because you got to feel Good Friday before Easter comes. And so we celebrate. We celebrate today because Christ is risen. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to comprehend it. You don't have to defend it. Just experience it. Amen. Sermon hymn, Thine is the Glory, 376. Please stand if you are able.